Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Humans have certain needs that are universal across the entire species. And that means that this is a truth for us, regardless of our age, our gender, our race, our culture, or nationality. It's also true across time. So it goes beyond just recent history. And one of these needs is the need for certainty. We all have a need for certainty. Certainty means safety. It means comfort. It means survival to us. So this is something that is true across the board for all people. And it's also true that this need for certainty applies to all areas of life, including our time at the office, our time at work. And while certainty is one of those universal human needs, it can mean different things to different people, or at least to some degree. When we look at the workplace, it could mean things such as a steady paycheck or a steady job, knowing that you can have some place to go to make a living on a regular basis. It could mean a stable, safe environment, be that the environment, the organization or company you work for. It could mean pleasant and stable relationships with your coworkers, with your boss, with the people with whom you spend so much time at work. So whatever that definition includes for each individual, it comes down to predictability, because again, it gives us that feeling of safety, of security, and our ability to survive. So you can see how this applies to every area of life and to every time in history, because whether we're talking about survival in the modern world, in terms of the workplace, the ability to pay our bills and have a roof over our heads and food on the table, or whether that means surviving in a time when maybe people lived in caves. So whatever that time period is, this need for certainty has been there in terms of our universal needs for every human that ever lived on this earth. But what's interesting about this need for certainty is something that can also be confusing for people. We also have a need for the opposite of certainty, uncertainty of sorts, but we can really call that something like variety or surprises or opportunities or new things, new experiences. So as humans, we have a need for certainty, but also its opposite, uncertainty, in the form of variety and surprises and things that make life less boring, less stale. As you probably have guessed by now, everybody's a little bit different. Some people lean more towards certainty in terms of what they would like in life than uncertainty. They like things to be the same from one day to the next. They don't like surprises. They don't like change. Other people are just the opposite. They prefer constant change. They prefer new things, new experience, to be constantly moving. And many others are somewhere in the middle. But wherever you happen to be, it's good to know where you are. It's good to understand what your preferences are on that spectrum of certainty, whether you are closer to the certainty end of the spectrum or to the more surprise and variety end of the spectrum, or maybe you're somewhere right in the middle of that. If you like certainty more than surprises, then a day that is predictable and things are pretty much the same from one day to the next is probably what you prefer. But if that sounds boring and stale and stagnant to you, you're probably someone who prefers to be more on that surprise and variety end of the spectrum. And if you're good with either in the right dose, then again, you're probably somewhere closer to the middle. What's important to include in this conversation is that just as people have their place on that scale, on that spectrum between total certainty and total uncertainty, they're somewhere on there, so too do many companies fall somewhere on that spectrum. Some companies by design are very much about change and variety and innovation, while others are more steady Freddy, if you will. They tend to stick to the same things, doing the same thing over and over again, whether they figured out what works for them, whether they don't have the need to innovate or they are not interested to innovate, whatever that situation may be for that company, they fall somewhere on that spectrum. So even within the same company, we could have a certain level of variability. Maybe a sales or a marketing department or team will lean more towards the variety and surprise and innovation end of that spectrum, whereas something like HR or accounting might be more leaning towards the end of the let's keep things steady end of that spectrum. And it's important to know that too. It's not just enough to know about where you fall on that spectrum as an individual, as an employee, but also where is your company? Where is the department within that company where you work? Because if you know these things, you have a better understanding of your fit within that company. If you have found yourself in a job where you are bored and feel like you're stagnating and nothing ever changes and every day is the same, and that makes you miserable, that may not be the right place for you, or maybe simply not the right position for you. It could also be something as simple, as straightforward as not the right manager for you, right? Because even in a department that may not have too many opportunities for excitement, if you have an innovative manager, a manager that leans more towards the surprise and variety end of their preference, they will probably translate some of that into their department. So this is why it's so important to understand these things, and why sometimes if you don't understand these things, if you never think about them, identify where you are, where your company is, where your manager might be, it might be a mystery as to why you're unhappy there, why you dread going to work. Or it might be revealing in terms of why you enjoy work so much. So for one person, that which may be boring and stagnant and suffocating may seem like the most comfortable and secure place for someone else. So you can see how individual differences and individual preferences can make all the difference in the world. And as we look at this need of certainty and uncertainty for yourself, for your surroundings, it's also important to know that where you are on that spectrum can also shift. It's not written in stone. It can shift with the passage of time. It can shift with your age. It can shift with what company you work for. It may be one thing at the previous company and another thing at the next company. And although the shift may not be drastic, but there may be a shift. You may have a change in where you are on that spectrum depending on where you are in your career, what's going on in your personal life. So again, there are other variables that come into this, which is why I wanted to bring this up today so that you can at least start thinking about it. Where are you in terms of that whole spectrum of this universal human need of certainty and uncertainty? Again, understanding this is to your benefit because it can be confusing to wrap your brain around how is it that we can want opposite things at the same time. But humans are complex, interesting, and sometimes we want things that seem to be opposing one another. So, as we look at our experiences at the workplace, it's important to look at ourselves, both as individuals and as a collective, as a species, as humanity. Now that you know that you can and do want both certainty and uncertainty, and that this applies in every area of life, including the workplace, you can have a better understanding of how you fit in, where you fit in, and what you can do to make your experience better. Sometimes it can be something as simple as having the knowledge, the understanding of what's happening within you and around you to help you to find peace, or to help you to find a resolution for something that you've been wanting to change or fix, or giving you the courage to make a change. So, knowledge, as I often say, is the potential for power, right? Because knowledge all by itself is just data, but applying that knowledge, especially in a way that helps you and benefits you, that's where the power comes in. So, take what you've learned today and apply it in your own life, in your own workplace experience. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Humans have certain needs, and some of those are universal needs. That means we all share these needs, and one of those is the need for certainty. But the interesting and sometimes confusing fact is that we also need uncertainty in the form of surprise, in the form of variety, in the form of new, exciting things and changing scenery. And this is no different for any area in life, including the workplace, our work experience. So, just as people have this need for certainty and uncertainty, which will vary by individuals and can change with certain variables such as passage of time, so too do companies tend to fall somewhere on that spectrum. Some companies, by their very nature, are much more settled in their ways, whereas others are much more innovative, where change is more of an experience for their employees. So, understanding that, understanding yourself, helps to know how you fit in and where you fit in within your company. And once you have that knowledge, you can start applying it to making changes or making enhancements in your workplace experience in such a way that they benefit you and hopefully those around you, including the company. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to take a look at your own propensities for your own needs for certainty and uncertainty. Think about, where do you fall on that spectrum, especially as it comes to the workplace, as it reflects in your workplace experience. Where do you fall on that spectrum? And where is your company? Where does your company, the employer for whom you work, where do they fall? What about your department? That department may not be the same as the rest of the company. What about your manager? Maybe you're the manager. That's another insight that you can take away from this week's episode. So I really encourage you to think about that, because it's one of those things that is so deeply engraved in the human experience, but it can seem contradictory and it can be confusing because we seem to want opposing things, both certainty and uncertainty. But once you start to understand that, once you see it for what it is, it's not that complicated. It's just a matter of using this information now to enhance your own experience. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. In addition to the podcast video version, you can also find videos that pertain to stress management. So I encourage you to check out Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube. The link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.